Let's turn off the table, and we're going to turn on the chair with all the parts. We'll leave the cushions off for now. Drop down material network. Name this to chair mat. We'll start off by look deving the wood, so the slats here. So we'll jump in, copy this entire network here from the table wood base. We'll paste it in. Makes our lives a little bit easier. Change the name of this to chairwood. We'll also change, leave that as wood as well. We'll apply that material to the wood parts, upper and lower. We'll open up the render view, fire it off. I've combined the wood lower, wood upper, and all the metal into 3 different objects, just so I didn't have to rotate them in Houdini. I did all this in Maya and then packed it into 3 different OBJs. So usually probably what I do in the look dev stage is just have one chair. But seeing as though this is already packed, I think we'll just carry on with this. Jump into the look dev camera, move around. We'll look at the wood on the chair first. Make sure we've got the camera selected, restart it. Shift the screen over. We can already see the wood is the wrong way around. It needs to be rotated. So let's do that. Rotate it by 90 degrees. Also means that our normal map is going to be wrong. I'm going to try the new method, as I don't think there's any way to rotate this map using this normal map node. So we're going to use an RS bump map. Let's try that. So this method is deprecated, and I believe this is the new method. I've currently put out a post on Facebook to just double check if this is actually the correct way to do it. So we'll give it a try. Copy the albedo, change it to the normal map, and we'll plug that into the input on the bump map. Plug this in to the bump input there, and we'll see if this actually works. Kind of looks like it hasn't. If this doesn't work, then what we can do is we can, it looks like that's not working so well. So what I'll do as well is I won't copy the albedo map, I'll copy the roughness, because the channels are referenced there. We could even use the roughness map as a bump map, so let's try that instead. See what that gives us. We'll also try using the albedo map as well. See if that gives us a different result. Let's turn this down even more. So it's actually giving us a better result than the normal map, I think. It's looking kind of cool, so we turn it off, turn it on. Oh, I think that's looking quite interesting. And make sure this is taking the chair wood out. Yeah, that's right. Doesn't seem to be a lot of dirt over this. So I'm going to drag this, put this into the chair wood out, just so I can see what's happening with the curvature. So it seems like it's doing a fair amount there, but we don't seem to be seeing it. It's not very strong. Yeah, there you go. So it is on the edge. It is working, which I think was kind of cool. So that's pretty much it. So I don't think we're going to do too much more with this. We want the wood to be matching to the table. So I think we can leave that as it is for now. I think that's looking kind of cool. Got the dust in there, which is looking kind of nice. Let's move on and we'll do the metal frame on the chair. I'm going to come out of the chair material network. Let's turn off the wood parts so we can focus on the metal. Jump back in, drop down an RS material. And this is going to be our base metal. Let's plug this into a redshift material. Let's plug it in and name this to chair metal out. Let's select that material, so chair metal out, jump back in. I think we'll zoom out a little bit for this one. I think somewhere around there. Launch the render view again. Gives us this basic shader. GGX. We'll change the Fresnel type from IOR to metalness. And I think there's a little bit of confusion behind metalness and sort of how to use it. So typically speaking, I guess a surface is either dielectric, so things like wood, plastic, or it's 100% metallic. So you kind of think that the value would either be 0 or 100. But I've gotten some really cool results in the past using sort of middle values and using whatever sort of range I need to. So the first thing I usually do is I take the diffuse weight right down until it gets super dark. I think something around this. I leave the roughness as it is for now. And I'm just going to start to slide up the metalness. And as we do this, the object's going to get lighter. So we want it to be a metallic object. But if we bring this up too high, then it looks kind of fake. And it's not looking so great. So let's start with kind of like a middle ground here. And I'm just going to slide this value down until that gets kind of dark. Somewhere around there. We can even have a slide around with the roughness. I think a value of around 0.2 is fine. It's giving us quite a nice look. And I think that's just making it look really weird, so I think it's a good idea to keep this quite low. Just remember that this is going to look a lot darker when this is in our scene. There's going to be shadows being casted on the top of it, so this will definitely get darker. But I think for now, it's looking kind of cool. Let's have a mess around with the roughness. We'll copy the grunge map from up here, And I more or less just keep reusing this really throughout the course. So let's plug this in. We'll also take a snapshot to see what that looks like. Plug the roughness into the reflection roughness channel. Let's view it and we'll see what this is looking like by itself. Okay, so I can't really see that. This also might be because I've not UV'd this chair. I may have used a triplanar method. So we'll drop down an RS triplanar. So if you don't have UVs, then you can use this method, which is kind of cool. There you go. I'd recommend only using this method when the pattern isn't really defined enough. So for example, on the wood, then you couldn't use triplanar because you need the wood to travel in a certain direction, and the RS triplanar is random. Okay, so that's looking kind of cool. Let's plug this in. That's made it look kind of interesting. Let's do what we did before. Let's increase the contrast a little bit. So we'll take a snapshot, refresh the render. Let's make those white values even whiter. So we add contrast on the RS change range using the all range min and all range max. So to make those whites whiter, let's drop down this value here. See that happening? Maybe pushing this just a little bit too far there. Let's try increasing the black levels. That's kind of getting interesting. I don't want to push that too much. That's starting to look really cool now. Starting to take on a nice metallic form. This looks great. Yeah, I think that's looking kind of nice. If we wanted to, we could also duplicate this. We'd also use the dust. So let's drag it from here. We want to mix these values together. So we want to add the dust with the grunge. So we use an RS add. It's kind of interesting. We could put an RS change range in, increase the contrast of this dust map. So we can lift the black levels, push those black levels further. We could even drop down the white levels. So not add contrast, but drop down those white levels so we're not getting as much dust. So we do that using the new range max. Something around that. Something kind of cool. Let's bypass it. So we'll take a snapshot, bypass this so we turn it off. And now we can see how this is contributing. I think that's looking kind of interesting, and yeah, I think that's looking pretty cool. One thing I'm going to try to do, and I'm not sure whether it makes a difference, is I'm going to cut this and I add the triplanar right after the maps. I'm not sure if that makes a difference, but that's my usual workflow. So yeah, it doesn't make any difference, which is cool. So let's undo what we just did, because That's going to save render time ever so slightly, seeing as though we're only using one triplanar map. And I think I'll just turn down the dust just a little bit more, just so it's a little bit more subtle there. Getting some pretty interesting reflections here. It's looking nice. Let's move on. We'll add the red paint layer to this. So RS material. Red paint. Let's plug this in. So we're just viewing the paint on its own. I think we'll go with sort of a value around 0.2. Leave the IOR set to around 1.5, that's fine. Create a fairly dark red. We also need to mess around with the roughness on this, so I think I'll just copy all of this branch. We'll plug that in. That gives us that. I think we'll offset it as well, so we'll just offset this by a load, maybe like by, I don't know, 60. Offset this one just in on one axis, just so we get slightly different results there. That's kind of looking cool. We'll make sure that the end values are between maybe 0.1. Yeah, I think maybe between 0.1 and 1. So we don't want it to get too glossy. It's nice. Take a snapshot, we'll move around. I think this could definitely do with some breakup in the diffuse, and also some breakup in the bump mapping to make it feel a little bit more like paint. For the paint bump map, I'm going to drop down on RS texture, or copy. Yeah, we'll drop a new one down. RS texture. We'll load in let's take a look. This one here, so I'm just going to show you what it is first. It's basically scratch painted metal surface, which is really cool. So that's going to work for us quite nicely. So we'll load that in. And what we're going to do is load this into the bump map first. We'll see what kind of effect this gives us. I actually didn't use this map the first time round. I just found it recently, so we're going to test it out and see if it looks better. I'm always trying to push every asset, so this is a really cool way to do it. And we'll make sure we plug this into an RS bump map first. I pause the render. Make sure it's going in the input slot. Turn this down to about 0.05 for now. I'll zoom right in. We're also going to need to make sure that we're using a triplanar map, as we don't have UVs. See what that looks like. Okay, so it's giving us a pretty interesting result there. Let's turn it down. I think maybe we can scale this. Yeah, I think that's looking kind of cool. Way too strong, but I think the tiling looks about right there. We'll half it again. Too strong still. We want this to be super subtle. Again, down to 0.001. I don't want this to be too strong. I think that's looking quite nice. This is looking a little bit weird here, but we're not going to see that. Let's take a snapshot, and I'm just going to add a minus here, so we're going to invert the bump map. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah. Let's try scaling this map one more time. You can also turn this, you can also leave this map at 1 and scale here instead. So that's another way we can do it. I think that's looking kind of interesting, but maybe still too strong. So I really do want this to be nice and subtle. Yeah, I think that's looking a little bit better there. So you want to drop this or blend this paint with the base metal. We're going to use this map as a mask. So drop down a material blender. Base metal goes into the base. The paint sits above or on top of the base metal. We've got this, so we're just seeing base metal there. And then we will plug this into the mask or the blend color slot. Looks like that. And it looks like we need to invert this. So take an RS change range. I think I'm going to duplicate this from here. We'll snip this line using Y, so hold down Y and snip it. Plug this in. Plug this in here. Drop down an RS invert. We'll put it there. That's looking kind of cool. You can also invert here. You can swap the new range min and new range max around, so this value would be 1, this value would be 0, so that's another way to invert. But I like dropping down an RS invert because it kind of says, if anyone jumps in your scene, they can clearly see that it's an invert. So that's looking really awesome already. I think we can tile it just a little bit more, so let's do that. We've got a 4.5. Yeah, it's looking nice. We'll also add in some edge wear. We're going to use the exact same technique we used on the wood. So when we added that dirt in, we use this technique here using the curvature nodes. So it's based on the geometry. I'm going to plug in our map so we can see the flat color right there. And then what we want to do is we want to, let's take a look, we want to multiply in this with this. So where there's white, there's paint, and where there's sort of the dark or black areas, there's the base metal. So this RS curvature generates a mask along the edges. So if we used an RS add in this case, we'd only be adding values on top of white, so it would just result in white. So that's why we multiply this dirt mask, the edge mask. That's why we multiply it in with these values to make the values darker along the edge. So let's try that. So we use an RS multiply, plug him in. And that didn't work as I was expected. I'm just thinking my way through this. Sometimes it does take me a moment to figure out what's going on. I'm going to break the connection on here. Break the connection on that. I'm going to view from here, so we can see what's happening. Okay, that's looking a little bit weird. I'm not sure why that's not working. We're adding these two values together. Let's just try viewing from one for now. Okay. Slide that down to something really small. So a nice small number. Yeah, let's make it nice and thin, that line. Let's test out the RS curvature as well. So this is the convex, this is the concave. And we'll drop those values right down too. Then we add those white values together. So we're combining it. So we've got that. That's looking fine. We would need to, let's take a look. Let's view from here. Tell you what we can do, to make this easier, we can add an RS add. So we add the white values from our RS curvature in with the values here. So adding them together like that, and then we can pipe this into the invert. View from the invert, and then that gives us that. So I'm just going to view back from the curvature, as we didn't really focus on breaking up this edge. So we did it earlier. All we did was multiplied these values in with this. Plug it in, and that gives us the breakup that we want. And then let's view from the invert now. That's looking kind of cool. I'm not happy with what's happening here. So there seems to be some weird values. So let's check it out and we'll see what's going on. Delete that. Let's plug the material blender in and we'll see what we got. So yeah, so we've got some nice wear there. I think that's looking quite nice overall. We could potentially increase the roughness just a little bit of the paint. I'm just going to zoom out just a little bit. I want this to be subtle. I don't want it to be too obvious. I think we can afford to boost up the curvature, so the edge wear. So the way we do that is just chuck an RS change range down, and we're going to pump up those white values. So let's put it to something like crazy, like 30. See that happening. Take a snapshot, put it back down to 1. I think maybe a value of 2 would be fine. And I'd also like to reduce the contrast in this mask that's revealing the base metal through the paint. I think there's too many chips. I'm not really liking it so much. So this is our mask, right by here. Let's reduce the contrast. So I'm thinking maybe we could lift up those white values, sorry, opposite way. Like that, so they're sort of not as strong, and I think that's looking better. You could also pull the blacks towards this way, and that would also wash it out a little bit. But I think overall that's looking pretty cool. Let's turn on the wood. Hit render. I think that's looking pretty nice. Yeah, I'm kind of happy with that. That's looking really cool. We could maybe even turn this dust down, but I think this is really working. I think that's looking really cool. We'll turn off the metal parts. Turn on the cushion. Jump inside, apply an RS material, if you can't find it in the scene, then you can click on the object and space G and it will take you to it. Going through a bit of a blind moment right now. Okay. Zoom in. I'm used to working with 2 windows or 2 screens. So usually for cloth, I tend to set this around maybe like 0.8. Yeah, about 0.8 is fine, I think. Drop down an RS texture. In this texture slot, I've got some fabric textures from Friendly Shade, and Friendly Shade, the quality of the textures are amazing. So there's a few different ones here. Let's try this Cotton Fabric 02. Just take a look at it, see what it looks like. That looks pretty interesting. I'm going to check out some more. Plain Fabric 09. Also want to use a texture that's quite low res because this is quite far away from the camera, so I don't want to add to the render time too much. See how high quality these textures are, they're really nice. Super high res. Super high res. It's really nice. Okay, so I think we'll use this Fabric 02. Let's load that in. Plug him in there. I'm just going to check if I've got UVs on this object because I can't quite remember. So drop down a UV quick shade to test that. It's kind of like adding a checkerboard to a material in Maya. See, I've got the UVs. So there is no need for triplanar mapping. Let's replay that. That's already looking pretty cool. Kind of interesting with those stains on there as well. It's really nice. Let's try tiling this. See what it looks like. That's starting to look kind of cool. Maybe a little bit more. Yeah, I think that looks pretty cool. Maybe it needs to be tiled a little bit more, but we're getting some nice detail in through there. We need to desaturate this and push it more towards like a cream color. Just copying these parameters over here. In here we'll load in the normal map. We'll plug this in to an RS normal map. Which, like I said earlier, I think this is actually deprecated, this node, but I need to double check that. On the advanced tab, we'll need to copy the remap scale over. And I'm just going to relaunch the render. Doesn't seem to have done anything there. Into the bump input. It would help if I plugged the map in. There you go. Okay, now we're talking. Yeah, I think that's looking kind of cool. Yeah, nice. Let's change the color. So we can drop down on RS color correct. And I'm going to push this in. Let's refresh it so it updates. Let's change the hue shift here. I'm just going to do a little region there. Oops, not contrast, hue shift. Push this towards like a creamy type color there. Saturation scale down. And I held shift and left click and dragged, and that creates like a region render. I think that's looking pretty cool. We could also use displacement, but that means we'd have to subdivide the model at render time. That's going to increase our renders. I think overall I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to take a snapshot. I'm going to turn off the normal map. I want to see sort of how much this is contributing. Yeah, it is really helping it. So that's more or less the cushions done. You could add a little bit of variation in the roughness, but I don't think it's going to show up too much, particularly when the surface is this rough. So I'll leave that down to you guys. If you fancy doing that, you can. I'm also noticing there's a fair amount of red in this, so I'm just going to drop this back just a touch, or forward just a touch rather, just to take that red out. So I'm dropping that down just a little bit more. Yeah, I think that looks pretty cool. Have a slide around with the roughness as well, see what kind of looks you get with it. We don't want to make it look too flat though. Yeah, so I think somewhere around 0.7, 0.8 is absolutely fine. I think that's looking really cool. I've turned the cushions on with the chairs now, so we can see what that looks like. And it looks really cool. Looking at it from this angle, the cushions look a little bit grey, so that's a little bit boring. What we'll do is just we'll increase that saturation just a little bit there, maybe even a little bit more, just to make it more of a creamy kind of colour, which I think looks nicer. You can also increase the scale, so the level scale, just to make them a little bit brighter maybe. I think that helps just a touch. I think overall they're looking really cool. I'm just turning this at different angles just to see what it looks like. I think if you guys get the time, then you could actually separate the geometry from the tassels. You could try planar them. Looks pretty cool to me. That normal map is really giving some nice creases.